Welcome to The Wire. I'm Chris, and today Daniel Tomo Thompson, designer of the Cymatics, the SKX, the Sci-Fi, the Hydronaut, with us today talking about surfing, surfboards, surf ranch, and physics, the universe, esoteric ideas, and obscure scientists. I love this episode because I think whether you share Tomo's interests outside of surfing or not, he's an example of how courageous thinking or a comfort with being different or exploring different ideas can create success and excitement in one's life, and an ability to help others have fun in the ocean on surfboards like the Evo. Because I have to acknowledge this at the outset, there was no one making surfboards that looked like Daniel Thompson's surfboards until Daniel Thompson started making surfboards. Here we go.
So that thing just records, does it all, that little...
Yeah.
Do I have to sit up and speak into it, or just like that? It's cool.
You can... Can you scoot in more and be comfortable? You're good, like that. I'll just... If you see me messing with the ding, 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 that just means I'm trying to collect the best audio that I can. Daniel Thompson.
Chris Grow.
That's my name. And we're starting. Welcome to the Wire podcast.
Thank you for having me, buddy.
How's it feel to be here?
Fantastic, as always.
How did it feel to be at Surf Ranch Pro this past weekend?
It felt like I was losing 20 kilos of weight, sweating my butt off. But other than that, it was really entertaining.
It was such a sauna, right? It's so hot.
It's warm up there.
So entertaining. We got a few things to talk about ways we were entertained at Surf Ranch. But kind of just like a general question, though, first. Like, what did you think of the surfing in general? Just everything you saw up there. Because you've been around professional surfing for a long time. Like, what struck you about the surfing that you saw?
Well, I think the athletes themselves are surfing really, really well. And I think they're pushing their own personal limits, riding that wave. Having ridden that wave, I know it's a very tricky wave to ride. And I think most people who watch the webcast can see it's a very fast-moving wave, and it doesn't allow any room for error, basically.
Yeah.
So that kind of limits their ability to get super radical and then also link their maneuvers consistently and smoothly throughout the wave. And I think that's where the problem lies, or the hang up lies as far as the entertainment value, because the surfers have to peg back their risk factor a certain degree in order to complete the wave and to fit their judging criteria. So in a sense, it was not stimulating the highest performances possible. So, but all that said, it was still a pretty unique, event, and it's new for surfing, and I think they can only grow from there. So
yeah,
it's all good.
So, I mean, speaking of linking maneuvers, Jordy Smith recently has been riding an SKX sometimes. Stewie Kennedy obviously helped design that board and surfed it a lot last year and this year. And before we get into some specifics around Surf Ranch and some other stuff that you noticed up there, I'm just curious. I mean, in hindsight, the SKX was really like your attempt to sort of trick WSL judges into scoring a modern planing hole more highly. Is that kind of accurate?
I mean, somewhat. I mean, trick's probably not the right word to use, but yeah, I guess, at a certain point, you need to, build boards to what the surfing criteria needs or desires in the world of professional surfing. And a lot of the athletes, aren't perhaps ready to get too far outside the box as far as the template of their board. And the general consensus is a pointed nose board is visually more appealing. Off the top, you can kind of gauge where part of the clock the board's clocking at as they do the maneuvers, which fits into the criteria without the judges having to think too much. So I don't want to be too I want to give what people want. If the rider wants a pointed nose, and Stewie was more comfortable with a pointed nose surfboard, then by all means, I want to be proficient at that design as well. But yeah, as your point to the bottom contours, I think, what I've learned along the way of the planing hole journey has allowed me to put that design attribute into the bottom of the boards and spice up the feelings underfoot of the boards. And I guess the SKX really achieved that.
Yeah, you're the first person who got me recognizing that for the judges, it's like a clock effect. How if they see something going from 6 to 12, it's easier for them to score it because there's a very clear indicator of like how vertical they got, kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
What did you learn from the whole experience of it? I mean, we're 18 months or so in with the SKX now.
Yeah.
And what's the whole experience taught you about shortboard design really?
Well, I guess the design is definitely relevant, and obviously so. It's been that style of squash tail pointed nose board has been the go-to high performance shortboard for competition for how long is it? 30, 40,
long time,
40 years. I don't know. It's a
for
a
our
standard,
lives, right?
And it continues to evolve. It's slowly getting shorter and more compact and getting a little bit more curvy in the profiles of the nose and getting a little bit more nose area up there, so it doesn't need to be so needly and long.
Yeah.
So I think it's still evolving very, very subtly, and I guess the SKX for me was to try and be at the forefront of that, making it shorter, a bit more parallel, a bit more area in the nose, kind of similar to the Sci-Fi. Not quite as much as the Sci-Fi, but still a little bit more area in the nose, so it allows you to make the board a little shorter, than maybe an inch shorter than the equivalent from some of the other shapers. Yeah, so that said, it's still a compact, if you want to say cutting edge, there might be a better word for it, version of the shortboard. It's trying to apply a lot of planing hole ideas to it, but it's at the end of the day, it's still pretty traditional.
So I wonder if in hindsight for you, it's become like a gateway drug. Do you think the SKX has been like a gateway drug that has got more people comfortable with getting on a modern planing hole design, or at least something more out there or different than what they would have previously imagined themselves surfing?
Yeah, I guess you could call it that. I guess surfing is a drug in a certain sense, isn't it?
Yeah, and new surfboards is a drug
stoked.
too.
Stoked is a sort of a high, and
yeah,
I guess that's a good point. There's a big demographic of the surfing population that is used to a traditional shaped nose and a traditional shaped board. So, it's good to be able to access that side of the market and have people try my boards and get a sense of what I'm doing with the hull design on a traditional shape, and then hopefully encourage them to continue to explore those feelings in a different package also. So yeah, I think that it has been successful in doing that and teaching surfers that there is other feelings you can get out of boards, and there may be a more pure way to ride a wave and a more high performance feeling that you can get out of surfing other than a traditional board, but perhaps the SKX is a good gateway to experience that.
So with the SKX in mind, I mean, you said earlier that if guys want a pointy nose on their board, you'll make it. But like philosophically or ideology wise or whatever, you're very much on a different side of the spectrum. And I want to know, when you were watching the surfing at Surf Ranch, what was the change that you thought everyone needed in their board?
Well, watching the Ranch Pro, it was pretty obvious there was a significant design flaw in just about everybody's board, and it was clear, it was definitive for me that then the last few inches, or the first few inches of the nose of their boards, right at the tip of the point, was catching, and they were falling and stumbling as a count of catching the tip of their nose. So for me, this is obviously, I've been a proponent of rounder nose, no nose boards for quite some time, so it's probably not a surprise that people are hearing me say this, but it's never been more apparent than watching the Surf Ranch Pro and a lot of guys stumbling and blowing waves because the tip of that nose was poking into the water and that was going down.
We saw that before you and I went up there. You and I watched two waves. I think we watched Pakadauskas and one other person. And just watching those first two waves, both waves you pointed out, see that? that was the nose catching.
Yeah.
You see that? That was the nose catching. And
Yeah.
it was kind of enlightening for me to have you there pointing it out, because they'd show the replays and it was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
He's right.
It was as plain as the nose on your face.
As
No pun intended.
pun intended.
Yeah.
As plain as the nose on your face.
Yeah.
Like that was it. So you have conversations with a lot of, professional surfers of varying levels. Have you ever really tried to force someone to just get away from the nose? Would you ever do that? I mean, where do you draw the line of you personally know what's best because you surf well enough to visualize what they're doing and intuit how the board design should respond to it? Where do you draw the line of like, I'm going to force someone to ride this versus I'm just going to make them the nose they want?
Well, there's no forcing anyone to do anything. I think I can only lead by example, and I think I'm learning continually that design attribute, that being a rounder nose, is superior in function above everything else, and I think that's what it all boils down to. There's the real motivation is to improve the function of a surfboard, of a high performance board, and that's always been my chief goal in being a designer. So I look at function before anything else, and then obviously secondary to that is the safety of the board, which again comes back into functionality. As a safer board is therefore the rider's more comfortable trying riskier maneuvers without injury. So I think that can only stimulate progression as well. But going back to function, even if you just look at the last 2 inches of the board, say, it's ultimately a very sharp, needly shape. And the prime function of a sharp object is to stick in, to poke into whatever the medium may be, whether it's a knife cutting meat
or a javelin in medieval times trying to spear a
sword, and whatever you can make whatever metaphor you want to talk about. But if we're talking about surfboards, a sharp reduction in area is going to pierce that water effortlessly with any. As soon as that tip touches that water, it's going to go into the water, and the ride is going to be over. So even if we just lose, say, 2 inches of the nose, it doesn't necessarily have to be a full chop nose. Obviously, they have plenty of functional arguments as well. But say if we just lose a couple of inches off the tip of a pointed nose board, how much percentage, if we look at it scientifically, how much of a percentage less wiping out is going to be done, less mistakes, less unforced errors, so to speak.
A percentage less. I don't know what it is, but it's enough, right?
I believe it'll be a significant, let's say it's 30% less errors over the whole contest or per dude, just hypothetical numbers.
Yeah.
At what point do we then revisit the judging criteria and go, okay, how much are we gaining here, or how much are we losing off the criteria of the visual aspect of what the judges are going to score a wave, because it doesn't have that 2 inches of sharpness ticking the clock over and over again.
From 6 to 12.
Say a guy, gets a 7.6 instead of an 8 on his ride, but on the next wave he needs another 7.6 to progress, but he falls because of the tip of the nose, then he loses. At what point? There's an algorithm there. There's an equation there where the functionality of the board being superior and being more consistent is gonna get the guy through the heat a greater amount of time. So I think there's a significant argument to be made out of improving the fundamental function of the design over the just fractions of a percentage of physical, visual effect stimulating the judges' ego.
Do you
for lack of whatever you want to say. So that's my point. I think it boils down to pure functionality.
Yeah,
it can be better, and if it can be better, why not do it? Why are we getting all hung up on aesthetics or
lack of
aesthetics?
Do you think that the 6 to 12 ticking of the clock of a sharp pointy nose above the lip, does the surfing audience want or care about that? or is it just the judges? I think that it really is a judging thing. I think that what you're saying, where if you eliminate the first couple inches of the nose and a percentage of nose catches go down, and that means that the average score goes down because the judges don't like it because they're not seeing the 6 to 12 ticking of the clock. I can't imagine a single surf fan being bummed on that. Can you?
Well, I don't think so. I think there may be a certain percentage of listeners out there that disagree with me, but I think overall, I think functionality should win the day. It's the only real, true argument that's relevant.
Yeah.
You know, if something works superior, it's a no-brainer. It should be.
Yeah.
So you know, and it's not until this point, at least in my mind, that I've drawn conclusive conclusions. You know, it's been conclusive to me that it's not just my opinion anymore. I've seen too much evidence of these failings over and over again in the ocean, that when you watch up close in these controlled environments like the KS Waveco, it's no longer feels like an opinion anymore. It's just too obvious. There's too much evidence over and over again that if you're watching really closely, you just see these failings of the equipment across the range, across the board. And that is in no way detracting from the approaches and the athleticism of all the riders, because they're all, you know, world-class athletes on the peak of their careers and ripping. They shouldn't be falling at all, you know, and a lot of the times I think it's just very subtle equipment malfunctions or letting them down.
How do you stay calm in the face of all this? I mean, how do you not run up to Santa Monica and not barge into the WSL, but knock on the door and be like, "Hey guys, I mean, I know you know who I am. Can I share an opinion? Can I try to give you my thoughts here?" I mean, how do you stay quiet and calm, and why don't you take a more active role in trying to make change across the board here?
I don't think it's ever a good idea to ram things down people's throats. They're more likely to ignore you in that sense. I think you can only lead by example. You can do stuff like what we're talking about now. Get your opinion out there and see if it catches on. And obviously, my designs are, you know, putting, you know, my mouth like into. I'm doing exactly what I'm saying. You're leading by example. I'm not just talking the talk. I'm walking the walk. So
I mean, how many of your boards don't have noses? Cymatic, Omni. I mean, you think about the amount of things you've done without noses. Yeah, your designs are where your mouth is.
There's only been three pointed nose designs I've ever done since I've been with Firewire. Was the V4, and then there's obviously the Sci-Fi, and then the SKX.
Yeah,
and you know, a lot of that is to serve a certain portion of the market and their needs, and I don't want to ignore everybody, because there is obviously a lot of relevant arguments for that design, because it's been relevant forever. So I don't want to exclude those people and that side of the market, but at the same time, it's been pretty clear where my passions truly lie.
Yeah. So let's talk a little, before we get into sort of the future of your work and the past with influences like Greeno. Let's talk about, you said the thing about Surf Ranch is it's the same wave every time. Like, that variability is gone. Let's talk about normal people at Surf Ranch really quick. If anyone listening, or you or I, go to Surf Ranch, everyone there will say Omni Cymatic, Omni Cymatic. If you've never surfed the pool, you have to do it on an Omni or a Cymatic. What's that like for you? That, I mean, the average person, your everyday surfer, has kind of already made that vote. The whole staff at Surf Ranch swears by those boards without noses. First time people who go there come out of it saying that they went with different boards, grabbed an Omni or grabbed a Cymatic, and those are the boards that they rode at the Surf Ranch. There's like the normal folk whose opinions you've won, and then there's Kelly. Kelly surfs the Cymatic all the time and has for like a year. So on one hand, I'm curious, like, what's it feel like to you that the normal surfer kind of votes for no-nos at Surf Ranch a lot of the time? And then what's it like to have actually influenced Kelly's choices like that, to like have gotten him over the hump with it?
Yeah, well, it's pretty obvious. It seems like pretty intuitive that the noseless boards are ideal for wave pool environments. even without thinking about it too clear, like too deeply, you know, it just seems like that style of board is eventually where we're going when the wave pools things grow globally, and they're going to be everywhere, and boards are designed for these pools. Functionally, it seems like it's going to be a more skate-like environment, more repetitious environment, like a skate park. And you know, obviously safety is going to be a concern. It's going to be a factor once you have controlled wave environments with public liability and such. Why would you have something that can harm yourself or someone else in the pool? It's an obvious step forward, and my like I said before, the functionality is the true factor that we really need to consider. And you know, it's much harder to poke your nose and to nosedive or to catch a forward rail of your board in the tube or whatever when you have more curve and more area up in the front end of your board, and there's nothing nothing to catch up there.
Well, that's what kind of blows my mind is how simply you put it earlier. You're like, the point of a point is to stab into something.
Yeah.
So why are we putting something at the front of a surfboard that will stab into and pierce the water and catch? And I think that the reason your designs go so well at Surf Ranch for someone like me is I surf soft waves all day in California. So when I go to the Surf Ranch, I'm not used to turning on a bowl that's going to pitch in the sections that it does so quickly. So I'm not catching when I'm doing turns without noses up there. Maybe just a couple thoughts on like how you've got Kelly so into the no-nose thing at this point. Why do you think that is, and how did that happen?
I think, you know, he's obviously, you know, studied a lot of my designs and historical designs. He's a fan of Greeno's work, for example. He's aware that George has been, you know, touting the demise of pointed noses and round noses so much more functional forever. So it's not a concept that I've created. I want to be clear about that. It's a very, you know, popular concept among certain shapers and certain surfers, and it's just one that I also firmly believe in. So it's not something I'm trying to claim as my own innovations, but obviously the result of the whole package of my designing and every single model is usually very unique in its own right. So I just want to make that point. But as a whole, Kelly's, you know, he's on board with that idea of making boards more functional, making them more compact, and that lending itself to being, you know, stimulating performance to continue to evolve over time and pushing surfing forward into the future. So, I mean, the fact that I've been able to create boards that are, you know, on his level that he's stoked on and inspiring and motivating him is obviously insane, and that's always been my dream.
Yeah. You said the other day to me, who was your favorite surfer growing up?
Kelly, of course. Like, I mean, I grew up in the age group where, you know, Kelly Slater and Black and White came out when I was like 10 years old, or just about, you know, just when you're first getting into surfing. So it's like the Bible of what you grew up with.
Yeah.
That's what found, you know, the foundation of my whole generation was growing up in Kelly. So we looked at everything he did forever, his whole career. So
God, that's just such a crazy position you're in today then. That's just insane that you're where you're at now.
Well,
that's just nuts.
I try not to think about it too much because I freak out. But
all right, so I won't make you freak out now. How do I say this? The world in your mind, like your worldview, has a very long horizon. You're open to a lot of ideas that a lot of other people might not learn in school or might not actively seek out. But I kind of want to start off at the easy place. It's something that a lot of people can try, no matter what their interest in the esoteric is. You meditate. How do you explain what meditating is, and when you meditate, what does it look like for you? What is your meditative practice?
Oh, well, I tried to try to meditate as much as possible. I think it's a very popular concept these days. A lot of people do. Personally, for me, it's just a method of getting in touch with myself and being grounded. I think one of the biggest challenges of being a human, no matter who you are, is the battle or the balance between the ego construct and the true soul nature of the spirit. And everybody has an ego. It's not necessarily a negative connotation. It's just the fact that you're, that the ego is just your awareness of yourself. Like, I am Daniel Thompson, you are Chris Grow. This is my job, this is my life, and this is what I do. By acknowledging that's ultimately your ego self. But I guess the journey I've taken with learning a little bit more about my spiritual side is that ultimately your consciousness, your pure nature of being alive is more of a wholeness of the consciousness of the entire universe, and everybody is equal in that sense of everybody's looking out their eyes. I'm looking at you, you're looking at me. It's ultimately an experience we're having. So meditation basically just brings you back to that point where you brings you back to a level playing field for me, where you acknowledge and love and appreciate everything and everyone on the same level, and you don't get too carried away on yourself, or you don't get too down on yourself, or you just it brings you back to the present more, I guess, in the present moment. And
is it an exercise of trying to let your ego fall away, or just not be there for however long?
I think that is, yeah. I mean, I kind of subscribe to the yogic path of India. I read the autobiography of a yogi, the Paramahansa Yogananda book. That was pretty inspiring. I had that on my audiobooks for years. I still do, and it's just a very inspiring book of getting in touch with your spirit side, or God, or however you want to make that connection with the greater nature of reality. It's just about going back to the breath and getting into a place of clarity where there's no thought and a single pointed consciousness. And when you go to that space and you're diligent with your concentration, lots of interesting stuff happens after a period of time. You feel significant you can feel significant growth of energy, moving up your spine. You feel your kind of consciousness expand in your forehead. They say it's the third eye awakening or whatever, and you can experience colours. You can feel very inspired and emotional, rushes of love or euphoria, and you have all these really weird esoteric things happen to you. So hard to really pinpoint what it is, but I mean, and it's not all about having these experiences too. It's again bringing yourself back to baseline, I call it, of consciousness, and I think that's a very healthy thing to do, to kind of defrag the programs that kind of creep up on your consciousness from a day-to-day thing that can ingrain themselves as bad habits. And so forth. And it's good as to kind of take a step back, do some mental exercise, just like physical exercise. And I think it's just a healthy thing that everyone should do.
You used that metaphor defrag the other day. Is that the metaphor of like defragging a hard drive? Kind of thing, like debugging the system.
Exactly.
The thing that, when I talk about your practice, the thing that comes to my mind is social media. Like a need to break free of the addiction of social media. So sitting and just allowing the impulse to check social media arise and ignore it, and then let it arise again 1 minute later and rise again 1 minute, and just ignoring it for 30 straight minutes. That's sort of building a mental muscle, like you just used that workout example kind of a thing. Maybe give me really quick, like a beginner's guide to it. How do you sit? How do you sit when you meditate?
I just like to sit cross-legged with a straight back on a couch or a floor with the cushions.
Do you set a timer?
No. I don't usually set a timer. I just kind of, it's good to make it a habit, but I don't always stick by it. No one ever sticks by everything perfectly every day, but sometimes I like to listen to like sound frequencies on YouTube, like whether it's like Tibetan bowls or certain things that act as a good stimulus to get you in a very one-pointed state of mind.
Yeah.
Sometimes just pure silence is all that's necessary. If there's nothing, no sounds that are, getting to you, bugging you, it's pretty easy for your mind to drift. So
yeah,
it's quite often good to put some headphones on and just listen to some meditative noises.
The sound frequencies thing is really interesting because you and Kelly called the cymatic based on cymatic waves. So maybe just for anyone who isn't aware, can you tell us what are cymatic waves and how does that relate to a frequency?
Well, I guess cymatics is a form of science that studies waveform phenomena and frequencies.
Yeah.
And I guess at certain frequencies, sound can manipulate matter. And some of the experiments they do to prove this is these sand plate experiments where they kind of put a sand plate over a speaker and tip like little grains of sand all over this speaker, and then they have a frequency generator plugged into the speaker and an amplifier, and as they turn the dial through the different frequencies at key frequencies, the sand forms these mandala effects and these sacred geometries, and there's a few key numbers that are quite powerful, like 432 hertz, and
which Kelly said was like the love frequency, I think.
Well, no, it's supposed to be the harmonic frequency of planet Earth, the Schumann resonance, which ultimately everything on this Earth plane vibrates at this 432, and then it's a certain mandala appears, and then there's 544, and I forget all the 8, 6. There's a progression of these frequencies, and interestingly enough, these frequencies are also in certain progressions of either the Fibonacci sequence or these other kind of meaningful mathematical sequences that are fundamental to universal law. So I'm not quoting this absolutely correctly, but you can look it up online. There's a lot on cymatics, but it's super interesting because there's the concept that everything created, all matter is kind of created as a construct of waveform frequency phenomena.
Yeah,
and they say, I mean, this is getting super esoteric, but they say in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was God, and then they basically say, well, maybe the Word was a sound, and the sound was a frequency coming out of the universe, and this frequency gave form to matter. It made particles of atoms coagulate or do something and create order out of chaos. It's super interesting. You can get really deep with it, but it's basically just a really interesting line of study, and it's obviously inspiring to look into these deeper realms of physics and the universe, and kind of postulate why things are the way they are.
Yeah. Before we go deeper on why things are the way they are, I just have to take a really practical pause for a second and tell our listeners that this 438, 432 megahertz frequency, you can play that on a speaker with a metal plate on top of the speaker and then dump salt or sand on it. And no bullshit, the sound waves physically make the salt or the sand form this gorgeous geometric, symmetrical mandala.
Yeah.
It's magic. I'm speechless trying to come up with a way to describe it, because when I saw this, it looked like a magic trick to me. And if you YouTube around, you can find tons of examples of stuff like this.
Yeah.
I mean, this is, I can't believe that I'm actually going to ask you this broad of a question, but I mean, what is the universe to you? I mean, because there have been a few times where I'm with you where you'll just like sort of go off on a tangent with like very crazy but conceivable, easy to understand theories as to what this whole thing is. Well, and with respect to anyone's belief system out there who might be listening, which I know you and I both have, I mean, what's your view of the whole thing? What are we doing here?
Yeah.
We're born, we die. In between, here we are. And what is this whole thing?
Well, that's the $1 billion question, isn't it? I mean, it's well, if to me, basically, I look at this stuff as like a pyramid. If you can figure out how the top of the pyramid works, then everything below that kind of organizes itself into like step by step kind of.
Yeah. When you grasp like the master principle,
the master plan, everything else kind of fits into that plan, and you're like, oh, I understand why we're here, what we're doing, and what my purpose is, and then once I know my purpose, then I can break that into achievable steps and have a happy life. You know, I think that's, in my mind, my ultimate philosophy is to figure out the bigger questions as best as you can, and then everything else kind of fits in an easier block in underneath that. So,
where are you at with the bigger questions or the top of the pyramid?
Well,
are you at the top 3 inches of the nose of the pyramid like a surfboard? Are you in the top 8 inches of the nose of the pyramid? What do you think you figured out?
I figured out that once you get to the top, you need to round that point off.
that's been it. And this
so it's like a rounded point tetrahedron.
A rounded point tetrahedron. It's not a pyramid.
The universe is a rounded point tetrahedron.
So I love this, man. The nose of the hydronaut is the perfect resemblance of the shape of the universe, and you figured this out in all sorts of crazy ways. And here we are.
Oh, yeah. No, that's not it at all. In all seriousness, I can only really quote, theoretical physicists and scientists that I resonate with. I think the best and most interesting theory of everything, there's a physicist, Nassim Haramein. He's got some really good points on how, he's creating free energy devices. And
what's a free energy device?
Well, I don't know. You can get really deep into that. I don't know how to explain how to create a free energy device, but he's got certain theoretical formulas for the constructs of a proton and a nucleus of an atom, and how that is how the fundamentals of quantum mechanics is maybe been incorrect in the past, and they've got these new concepts for the geometry of atoms and that kind of formula. But I guess the ultimate truths that we've learned from quantum physics is that ultimately the whole reality, 99.9% of this universe is empty space. It's hollow. It's literally a hologram we're in. And that's fact. That's not just an opinion.
And that's fact because, help me, if you go down and you look at up close in the cell or in the atom, you can see all the empty space, and the quarks are kind of orbiting around electrons. Each other or whatever. Electrons.
Yeah. So if you zoom into an atom, way in there to a scale. So if you bring a scale of an atom up to the size of where we are in this room right now, the proton, say if the proton is the size of a ping pong ball, say, then at that scale the electron will be a grain of rice, and it'll be like 4 miles away from here.
Whoa.
Orbiting the ping pong ball.
Whoa, that's insane to think about.
Something along those lines. Don't quote me exactly on that, but it's along those lines. So if we think that we know that everything's made up of atoms, everything from the table, the chair we're sitting on, our bodies, our brains, everything is made up of these atoms that are physically not touching each other. It's all held together by a frequency. So again, that brings it back to the cymatics. Why is cymatics important? Everything in this world is held together by frequency, and it's all just energy and frequency and form that creates the form. So,
this almost feels like, it's funny. I imagine you like seeing the Matrix when you walk around, but I know that you're really a student of this stuff, and you just have a natural curiosity of it, and you're not claiming to be a professor or anything like that.
No,
maybe just say the name of that individual who you said wrote the book that was interesting for people to check out.
Oh well, there's
Nassim
Haramein. I'm just spacing on the name of his. He just released a film that's super interesting. We'll maybe link that in the.
Done. We'll put it in the show notes. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the other theoretical physicists that I've resonated with is this English guy called Maurice Cottrell,
Maurice Cottrell.
And he's an author. He's wrote several books on like the Mayans and the sunspot cycles, and he's a student of how the functionality of the sun, and how that's fundamentally the source of all life on this earth is the sun. Obviously, it's the source of energy that makes everything grow on this planet. And so he's looked really deeply into how the sun works and the cycles it has. It has these yearly cycles, and these longer cycles at 25-year cycles and 100-year cycles and thousands-year cycles, and it's really apparent in the history of our planet and how the sun is a major contributor to heating and cooling on the planet, and they can link it to the growth spikes in humanity and the civilizations and all that kind of stuff. So that was super interesting. But he also had some really interesting concepts on the whole grand questions and how the universe was created. Most interesting one, I'm probably not going to quote it right, but I'll do my best. He was basically basing it off Einstein's equation, E equals mc squared, and energy equals matter times the speed of light squared. So if you use that as a formula, his argument is energy. In the beginning, the ultimate energy was God. God is energy. He was the only thing present in the universe. So the only thing God couldn't do was to grow greater than he already was, because there's no reference point for him to grow bigger or smaller. He just was. So that's the fundamental singularity of before there was a universe. So the astrophysicists in the Big Bang Theory, states that there was a singularity that exploded and it created this almighty massive explosion, and then it created all matter and everything what there was. So Maurice Cottrell says that God, being conscious, almighty consciousness, wanted to grow, so he came up with this plan to separate a portion of his energy, and he gave the example. Let's say God was 1,000,000 volts, just to keep it easy to understand. So God was 1,000,000 volts in the beginning, and he decided he wanted to grow, so he separated 500,000 of his volts, half of his volts, and he put it to the other side of Einstein's equation where it becomes matter. And it all went bang. So
insane.
It's pretty out there. I loved it. It's the coolest story or theoretical science I've ever heard. So anyway, everything was all, it was 500 volts, 500,000 volts of energy that became the universe, and over time, and with these certain cymatic frequencies, which God used to give form to matter and create order out of chaos, and this self-organizing system of the universe coagulating and organizing itself and becoming planets and solar systems and spiral galaxies, all this stuff, and eventually a planet Earth, and then eventually fungi and all this stuff that eventually turns into a walking, talking human, and we're having this podcast, and it's insane. So that was super cool, and then it gets even deeper into spiritual concepts like reincarnation, and how the whole purpose of God growing was for us to be eventually have conscious life, and it to spread love and help one another and become higher voltage beings. So we progress and become high voltage beings until the point where, progress, what I mean by that is we have a life, we die, we reincarnate, and increase our voltage to the point where we become basically saints or enlightened as light beings of pure love. And then at that point, when we've ascended to a certain level, we escape. When we die, we escape the Earth's gravitational field and go back to the source consciousness, which is God, and then God then grows his voltage.
Whoa.
And so over a grand scheme of infinite time, if enough people, enough conscious entities in the universe keep expanding their energy and consciousness and doing right things by others and becoming more love, then God eventually grows greater and greater and greater, and that is ultimately the purpose of life, is to make God greater.
So
So that's super deep.
A few points on this. Like, first of all, that kind of ties in as a story to back up what you were saying earlier about experiencing a conscious of being sort of one with everything.
Right.
And I also, when I hear you talk about stuff like this, you talk about all these things as interesting theories or intriguing stories that you find when you do your own reading and research. I don't ever hear you claim anything like from a dogmatic perspective, like this is true and I know it. You seem to always go through all these things as if it's just really intriguing, curiosity-inspiring things to look at and research to try to find answers. And I wonder, like, look, you've been successful at this point. You've created a life that gives you a lot of like free time, and you don't use that time to just basically eat candy and drink beer and watch football or something. How do you keep like the intellectual curiosity and the appetite to constantly seek these types of things out? Because you and I both know people who, whether they've come into financial success or just have a lot of free time, a lot of it's wasted or a lot of it's spent doing things that are just sort of not very worthwhile pursuits of one's time, but your intellectual kind of appetite seems to always be there to research these types of things. Where does that come from?
I don't know, to be honest.
Because I guarantee you, next time we hang out, you're going to have another physicist or another person or a shaman or something, and you're going to tell me something else that you've come across.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just my natural tendencies. I want to know things, and I don't claim to know anything. That's the paradox. Mm-hmm. You know, it's what is ultimately truth. What can we prove is actually true? When you break down, you know, the fundamentals of the reality, like we can't even prove what reality really is, you know, so mm-hmm. What is truth in its essence, you know? So yeah. I don't pretend to know anything. This is all my opinion and based off stuff that, you know, I've studied off really intellectual people that stimulate my, mm-hmm. You know, consciousness, whatever. So, yeah, you know, like people, I think what it breaks down, the most important things I've learned is, the most important things to me is our own experiences on this earth, like what we do day to day and our happiness and just the nature of our experience that we have, and being able to have that freedom to choose what you want to experience is a pretty valuable thing, but I think fundamentally a lot of people take for granted, you know. Mm-hmm. You don't need to listen to all the negative crap that comes out of the TV or the radio and politics and all that nonsense that's not enriching your life. It's just putting you in a fear state to lower your frequency so that you don't align with the ultimate goals that you put out there for yourself. Because I think the secret of the secret, so to speak, is to raise your resonant frequency so that you can project what you want out into the universe so that it'll come back to you. I do believe in the law of attraction, so to speak, mm-hmm. you know. And so I think a big part of that is, you know, being happy, being positive, being loving, being caring to, you know, your fellow humans, mm-hmm. whatever, being the environment, everything, just doing mm-hmm. you know, the right thing and being stoked and choosing your every moment that you are on this planet. You can choose what you want to experience and choose to be happy or choose to be sad, and mm-hmm. I think we forget that, you know, and even I forget it. You know, you got to remind yourself every day, and that's why people meditate, and that's why people seek religion and do all this other stuff, is to reconnect to the fundamental mm-hmm. truths of what's going on here, that everything is really oneness. It's all one consciousness, and we're all experiencing ourselves or experiencing that one consciousness subjectively, and it's all a feedback loop into a grand mm-hmm. way of things.
Well, I appreciate talking to you about this kind of thing because it functions as a little bit like a system or a pattern interrupt for me, where I'm on my track, man. I surf, I work, I come in here, I travel sometimes, but like I'm very much on my track. I'm a creature of habit. And when I talk to you about this stuff, it kind of just like totally comes out of left field and sort of just is a nice little interrupt to make me think about things and get out of my normal habits. I want to talk to you about the manifesting your reality sometime, but maybe we save that for next time because that's a kind of big conversation in and of itself.
Well, we can go forever on this deep stuff. It's an endless rabbit hole.
So let's do this. Let's go deeper on the rabbit hole next time. And for now, there's kind of, because we've been doing this, we're actually about to hit an hour.
All right, cool.
There's some rapid fire stuff I want to ask you though.
Right on.
To sort of send you out of here because it's been a fun conversation and we should hit some quick points real quick.
Okay.
What's one thing that you've learned in the last 6 months, off the top of your head? What have you learned in the last 6 months, or changed your mind on? One of the two. Something you've learned or changed your mind about in the last 6 months.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things you've learned. You're constantly learning. I'm not going to have something inspiring to say on that because it's just life's a constant learning process, a constant evolution. I guess one thing for me is to keep my health in check. I had a bit of an illness earlier in the year, and that really set me back. And I was struggling to just be able to do daily stuff. So I got over that with some good, healthy program, and all of a sudden I was back on track, and feeling 100%. So that's one thing, but there's many things to learn.
Cool.
Yeah.
Done. My favorite Tool song is?
They're all good. Tool's my favorite band. I guess 46 and 2 is pretty damn good.
46 and 2.
Yeah.
I'll throw my hat in the ring and say my favorite is Zombie, for anyone who wants to listen to that one. My favorite, you already said this. How about this? My second favorite surfer growing up was, because you already said Kelly. Who's your second favorite surfer growing up?
Curran, for sure. Tom was the man back in the early days. He's still a man, but I loved his style.
Okay.
Yeah.
What I love the most, my favorite thing about Stewie Kennedy is... Favorite thing about Stu Kennedy?
Best thing about Stu Kennedy is he's a good Aussie bloke who loves a beer and loves a laugh.
Most annoying thing about Stu Kennedy is what? That he's an Aussie bloke, loves a beer, loves a laugh?
Exactly. Same answer for the same different question.
All right, last question. Who would win in a heat, Chewy Reyna or Mark Price?
Oh, that's a tough one. Let's just say if it was at Oceanside, Chewy would kill Mark, and if it was in the case Wavepool, I think Mark would just beat Chewy.
Done. Dan, super fun hanging, man. Thank you.
Right on, Chris. That was fun.
And that is it for this episode of The Wire Podcast. You will find links and resources associated with this episode at firewiresurfboards.com/the-wire.